Are these elections just giving a new veneer of credibility? And are we talking about a powerless democracy, an illusion, or is there a chance here of real change?
Well, thank you for that, and for including me in this excellent discussion. Also, thanks to Samah and Nadia for their brilliant interventions. I'm afraid that I would have to share Samah, her skepticism and cynicism of this particular situation. Obviously, there can never be true elections and true democratic elections under occupation, but of course, there can be democracy under occupation because these are two different principles. Democracy is a culture. It's either you have the democratic culture or you don't. You have countries like the United States, for example, that hold elections regularly. And they pride themselves of being the greatest democracy on earth. But if you look at the work of the likes of Noam Chomsky and others, they tell you that we really don't have true democracy. We have an oligarchy that's controlling outcomes, money, lobby groups, pressure groups, and so forth and so on. That the ordinary person's viewpoint doesn't really matter and the vote doesn't change a great deal on the ground. So that is really kind of the discrepancy between true democracy and you know, a democratic culture and the political and the socioeconomic context of this culture. In Palestine, we actually did have democracy and we do have a democratic culture for such a long time. I mean, just if you look at Palestinian prisons, I mean, if Palestinian prisoners are able to hold elections while in shackles, while in isolation, while under torture and duress, if Palestinian prisoners can maintain that, of course the Palestinian people can maintain the larger democratic culture that we know that, you know, often and during the Israeli occupation from 1967 until today in the unions and student groups, in every facet of life, democracy does exist in Palestine as a culture. But what is happening and what happened particularly after the signing of the Oslo Accords in 1994, this changed dramatically and not in good ways. There has been the growth of the factions and the power of the factions and their ability to create true political division in Palestinian societies, managed to harness that existing democratic culture for their own factional, sinister reasons. And that's really the true division in Palestinian society. For example, if you look at the current election, the registration for the current elections in May, July, and August, you find that 93% of all Palestinians have registered to vote. I mean, this is of Palestinian adults, of course. I mean, this is an astounding number. Again, once more, it illustrates the existence of a democratic ideals and democratic culture in our society. But this sorry display that is being put forth by Mahmoud Abbas and his ilk, I mean, that have nothing to do with democracy whatsoever, because the question that we really need to ask, what is the point? What are they trying to achieve? You know, are they trying to achieve political unity? We are a liberation movement. Political unity does not need elections to be achieved. Political unity can be achieved in other ways. I don't know of any liberation movement, any anti-colonial liberation movement anywhere in the Southern Hemisphere that actually went through the process of state building before the process of liberation itself. I mean, look what happened in South Africa in the elections of 1994. That kind of paved the way to the formal end of apartheid. It was the culmination of a process that lasted for about 4 years that aimed at ending apartheid in that country. And the elections was this kind of this beautiful moment at the end in which all people of all colors and all races and all ethnicities managed to go to the voting booths at the same time and vote for their candidates. And that's how real political change began taking form in South Africa. In the Palestinian case, it's the other way around. You have an Israeli military, you have occupation, you have Israeli prisons, you have Israeli checkpoints, you have Israeli illegal Jewish colonies throughout Palestine. You have Gaza under a hermetic siege. People are dying from the lack of medicine. People are dying as a result of the siege. People are not able to live a normal life. They are under military occupation. That's what it is. Yet at the same time, Salam Fayyad and Mahmoud Abbas and all these individuals took us through this very strange, bewildering journey of state building. They have titles as presidents and ministers and His Highness and His Excellency and so forth and so on. Yet the people are still living under siege and they are being shot at by Israeli snipers. And they have to line up before Israeli checkpoints in order for them to go to their schools, to go to their farms, to go to their hospitals, to go to work, to go, to leave the Palestine or to come back and so forth. So we have these strange parallel realities that have existed in Palestine since 1994. A group of Palestinians, the ruling class, if you will, found some sort of kind of a balance between making a claim to representing Palestinians, yet at the same time willing to coexist with the Israeli occupation. When the Palestinian people, the vast majority of them are poor, the vast majority of them are disenfranchised, the vast majority of them are either under siege or living behind checkpoints and so forth and so on. A group of people, a small group of people getting richer and a much larger mass of people getting poorer. So yes, the question can be answered simply by saying democracy is possible even under occupation, even in prison. But what is happening in Palestine right now has nothing to do with democracy whatsoever. It is something entirely different. Simply because if Mahmoud Abbas was indeed a democratic man, and all of his supporters and followers and so forth, well, Mr. Abbas, you've had the chance since 1994 to, and particularly since 2005 when he became the president of the Palestinian Authority, you've had the chance to really convey that essence of democracy, to bring your people together, to really send signals to your people that you are willing to engage civil society, you are willing to work with grassroots communities and so forth and so on. But the exact opposite has actually taken place. The exact opposite. Katie, by the way, just in case I exceed my time, if you could just stop me whenever you want to.
No, please carry on.
He has done the exact opposite. Not only within the larger Palestinian body politic, but within his own party, within the PLO itself. He has made sure that his enemies are kept at bay. He has done very little to release Marwan Barghouti, to the point that Fadwa, Marwan's wife, has accused Abbas and the Palestinian Authority openly that they are intentionally want to keep Marwan in jail because they know if Marwan is out, then Mahmoud Abbas will be out because Marwan is far more popular. And Mahmoud Abbas, as of poll after poll, shows that most Palestinians want him out. The 85-year-old man refuses to relent, and he continues to kind of purge his enemies one after the other. How is it, from any rational point of view, that this group of people, this group of wealthy Palestinians with VIP cards who have worked diligently to sustain their power and their wealth under the Israeli occupation and worked with the Americans, with Washington, with one administration after another to ensure that there can be no Palestinian unity, especially with groups that are viewed as terrorists from Washington's point of view, how is it possible that he is now having this moral awakening and he is willing to bring about real and substantive change in his society? Of course, this is not the case at all. Now, I think there's one thing that we often omit. In January, earlier this year, when the Biden administration took over the White House, They sent a message. It was transmitted through Israeli media. Palestinian media did not cover it very well, particularly Israel's Channel 20, quoting American officials saying that Mr. Biden has sent a very clear and decisive message to Abbas: hold elections in order for you to renew your legitimacy. 3 days later, there was the decree that we have been waiting for over these years. Mr. Abbas has decided to hold the elections because of American pressures in order for him to release the money that the Trump administration has held from his authority for all of these months. That's really the essence of the elections. But what he did not realize, that the real enemy is not going to be Hamas. Because Hamas is clever now. They've learned from their mistake. They are going to do their very best to win enough sizable representation in the Palestine Legislative Council, but not to win the leadership. They don't want, most likely they will not be competing in the presidential elections if that is to be held in the first place, and so forth. So there was some kind of an arrangement made between Hamas and Fatah. Everybody learned from previous mistakes. But what Abbas did not anticipate is that it's going to be Barghouti and Naser-Najjab, as my esteemed colleagues mentioned earlier, that are going to actually form the list that could potentially oust Abbas. And in fact, according to opinion polls, the Barghouti Qudwa list would in fact not only defeat Abbas, but defeat Abbas and Fatah.
Can I just stop you for a second to ask a little bit about Marwan Barghouti and give us a bit of background about him, because I know that we hear a little bit about him. He's talked about by, international observers as a potential Mandela, somebody capable of unifying his people. But can you tell us something about him, his policies, and of course, why he's sitting in a jail cell?
Absolutely. I am myself quite wary of such terminologies as the Palestinian Mandela and stuff, because that has its own political connotations. But indeed, Marwan is a very important political figure in Palestine. And he is the most popular Palestinian political figure within the occupied territories. And if elections were to be held today, tomorrow, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Marwan would have won majority of the votes and would become the president of the Palestinian Authority. Now, Marwan was arrested in 2002. He was the founder of the Shabiba group, which is the youth group of the Fatah movement. And he was very close to Yasser Arafat, the late Palestinian leader. And his relationship with Arafat and his own connections and networks allowed him to win a great deal of support among the younger cadre within the Fatah movement, and he's still particularly popular among the younger people within Fatah. In 2002, Israel arrested him. They said that he had been taking part and facilitating various militant attacks against Israeli targets, and they have sentenced him to many years in prison. That was 2002, so he hasn't been in prison for nearly 2 decades, mostly in solitary confinement. And the things that's really interesting about this is that despite the fact that he has been absent more or less from the Palestinian political scene for 20 years, the degree of support for Marwan remained very strong. To the extent that when Abbas made his decree and called for elections, he sent a delegation to Marwan in prison, and he was allowed the Israeli prison administration that often doesn't even allow the Red Cross to meet Marwan. They actually allowed the Palestinian Authority officials to go and meet him and to negotiate with him to join, to be the head of the Abbas's list and to promise not to run for presidential elections. Marwan refused. He insisted. Eventually, Nasser Qudwa ran with his own list, and eventually Marwan joined his list through his wife Fadwa. Now, this is all new to Mahmoud Abbas. Abbas did not anticipate that the cards are going to be mixed in so hideous a way, and that the danger is not going to be coming from Hamas itself, because that has been sorted out, but actually from Marwan Barghouti. So, but here's the danger, and I'm going to finish with this. If the elections are to take place, then Marwan Barghouti's list will win. And if Marwan runs for presidential elections, then he will win. If the elections is not to take place, Now, if this may seem to be convenient, well, why isn't Abbas basically opting out? It should be really like a no-brainer for Abbas and his followers. The reason he's not, because he knows that if he cancels the elections, this could be the last straw that could potentially break the Fatah movement altogether and divide the movement into various factions and branches, and he fears that. This is why the hesitance. This is why they haven't canceled the elections as of yet. And I'm gonna stop here because I think I'm sure I exceeded my time. Sorry for that.